Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third event of the Reproduction and Religion Public Pedagogies Project. This virtual conversation series is sponsored by the Luce AAR Advancing Public Scholarship Grant Program and is also part of the Reproductive Righteousness Project. This is a really hard morning to be coming together. We really appreciate everyone who has come despite everything, and we hope that we can create some form of being together as a community and reflect upon these issues that constantly seem to be becoming more and more important. So the three of us pictured on the right are the series organizers, and today we're really excited to bring experts on religion and abortion to talk to us and have an interdisciplinary conversation aimed at supporting a community of scholars, advocates, and practitioners who work on really important yet also underaddressed topics. So we'll be playing three roles today. Risa is our tech MC, so if you have any questions, you can send her a message directly. If you're having any issues, Mickey will be moderating the panel discussion, and I will introduce and help with the Q&A. Mickey, would you like to introduce our speakers?
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here, all of our speakers as well as the audience. I know that it is a weird and hard morning, speaking for myself and maybe other people, but I am really grateful for the opportunity to kind of sit with each other and talk about things that are really important. So we're really thrilled to have four experts with us today to discuss abortion and religion, two of my favorite topics. And so we want to take a few minutes to introduce you to each speaker, and then we'll launch into our conversation, and Leah will lead that conversation. Um, Dr. Zahra Ayubi is an associate professor of Islamic studies in the Department of Religion at Dartmouth University, and she specializes in feminist philosophy of Islam and has published on gendered concepts of ethics, justice, and religious authority, and on Muslim feminist thought and American Muslim women's experiences. She's author of Gendered Morality, Classical Islamic Ethics of the Self, Family, and Society, which was published with Columbia University Press in 2019. So thank you so much for being here. We're so excited that you're here. Dr. Monique Moultrie is a professor of religious studies, Africana studies, and women's gender and sexuality studies at Georgia State University. She's a womanist or Black feminist ethicist who is currently researching Black child-free women and faith as part of a project on reproductive justice and religion. Her scholarly interests include sexual ethics, African American religions, and gender and sexuality studies. She has written Passionate and Pious, Religious Media and Black Women's Sexuality, published with Duke University Press in 2017, and Hidden Histories, Faith and Black Lesbian Leadership, also published with Duke in 2023. And she's currently the co-principal investigator for the Garden Initiative for Black Women's Religious Activism. Welcome you, Dr. Moultrie. Thank you. Third, we have Reverend Dr. Toddie Peters, who's a professor of religious studies and founding director of the Poverty and Social Justice Program at Elon University. Her work as a feminist social ethicist is focused on globalization, economic, environmental, and reproductive justice. She's the author and editor of 9 books and more than 25 peer-reviewed publications, and her most recent book is Trust Women, A Progressive Christian Argument for Reproductive Justice in 2018. She's the president-elect of the Society of Christian Ethics, a clinic escort, fellow clinic escort, a founding member of Sacred Spiritual Alliance of Communities for Reproductive Dignity, and serves on PPFA's Clergy Advocacy Board. Welcome, Reverend Dr. Toddie Peters. And last but not least is Dr. Michal Rocher, is an associate professor of Jewish studies at Rutgers University, the State University of New Jersey, where she teaches courses on religion and reproduction, women and gender in contemporary religion, and Israel-Palestine. Her research focuses on women in contemporary Judaism, reproductive ethics, and religious authority. She's the author of Conceiving Agency, Reproductive Authority Among Haredi Women from 2020 in Indiana University Press, an ethnography of Israeli ultra-Orthodox Jewish women's reproductive ethics, and she's writing her second book, The New Rabbis, an ethnography of women rabbis in American Orthodoxy. Dr. Osher is a PI on 2 studies exploring the intersection of religious identity and abortion, and has interviewed over 100 Jews who have had abortions in America since 1973, which is very cool. So I'm really excited you all are here. I'm very excited for our discussion amidst everything going on in the world, and I will turn it over to Leah so we can start these really wonderful conversations together.
Thank you, Mickey, and thank you all for being here. So we're going to start with a bit of a conversation between the speakers, and then we will open up the floor for participants. Please feel free to put comments and questions in the chat at any point, and we will address them later on. So I will begin for the first question. We would really love to hear about each of you and your work. If you could please tell us, how did you come to focus on the intersections of religion and reproductive politics? Zahra, would you like to get us going?
Sure. Thank you so much for having having me and having all of us on this morning in particular. Thanks for tuning in because I would imagine that perhaps people want to be elsewhere at the moment. Um, I came to the field of study that I'm working on right now um, through a very, I guess, predictable and unpredictable path in the sense that just the study of gender and religion itself was something that was always of interest to me. I came to Islamic studies vis-a-vis feminist intersections with Islam. So not too surprising, I suppose, there. Um, but within Islamic studies, a lot of focus is on Islamic law, and there's reasons for that that I don't need to get into. But over the course of being in gender and Islam, in the field of gender and Islam and gender Islamic ethics is my area of specialty, it became increasingly clear that issues of the body and gendered experience of embodied gendered experiences, including medical care and the way that women and non-binary Muslims experience medical care, including reproductive care and abortion, is an area that people don't study, need to study, and is very much an ethics question, a religious ethics question, as well as a medical issue. And that really drove the interest and led me to these wonderful people that I collaborate with, and as well as the individual projects that I do. And frankly, I'll pass it off to my colleagues, but frankly, leads us to the very significance of the project that we have going, of how religion and reproductive discourses really are intertwined in ways that we must not just acknowledge but deeply study and um, act upon and create ethics and policies surrounding having been informed by the discourse of medicine and religion and how it comes together.
Thank you so much, Zahra. We're so happy that you're here. Monique, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much again for the panel and this time to be together. I'm a womanist or a Black feminist sexual ethicist, and my private organizing and campaigning with reproductive justice groups in 2014 to fight Tennessee's abortion ban led to my interest in following this subject intellectually. Due to some shifts in my own personal life, including earning tenure and believing the fallacy that that would give me protection, a personal feeling of urgency and agency, I think, after the fall of Roe, and the sudden passing of my partner, who was a minister, I felt free to pursue these topics and delve a bit deeper into reproductive politics. Yet my interest was and is more expansive than abortion. In fact, I joined this project initially because of my interest in making visible and theorizing the experiences of Black child-free women of faith. And I surprisingly assumed that I would find persons who were choosing to remain child-free and who'd had terminations because they wanted to remain child-free, which was not the case. So surprise on me, I landed with a great group of colleagues to do this project, but it's kind of not where I thought I was going as far as it relates to reproductive politics. I have planned to use these interviews that I've been doing in part of a longer work that is going to be on reproductive justice and Black religion. And I'm happy to speak more about that, but largely that's where and how I enter this conversation.
Monique, thank you so much for reminding us that there's always surprises on the way. Toddie.
Yes, again, I'll join my colleagues in thanking you for this invitation, and really appreciate the space, especially this morning to talk about these issues. So yeah, I entered the space as a Protestant, particularly as a Presbyterian and a Christian social ethicist. I studied at Union in New York, so my work is deeply rooted in liberation theology and feminist liberation theology. Um, I worked for the National Presbyterian Church right after college, and that was really what began my professional interest in the issue of abortion. That was when the PCUSA was having a big task force on problem pregnancy and abortion, and one of my jobs as a staff person who was working with the Justice for Women office, the advocacy office, was to monitor that task force. And so for 2 years, I watched as Presbyterians deliberated about abortion in ways that shocked and surprised and concerned me. And I could talk more about that if anyone's interested, but I went to Union after that. I studied with Beverly Harrison, who wrote sort of the book in 1983 called Our Right to Choose within the field of Christian ethics. And then, I think many people just sort of thought Bev addressed all the questions there were to address. And so no one in the field wrote about it after that. And as the 2010 midterms really shifted the landscape of legislation around abortion, and we saw just the trap laws. Began with the trap laws, and then it shifted into bans. And the writing was on the wall that they were coming after Roe. Many of my colleagues came to me and said, "You have to write on this." My work had been previously on economics, poverty, globalization. I did some sexual justice work, but it just became increasingly clear that I was positioned to work on it. I was interested in it, and no one in the field was really working on it. And so I took my last sabbatical, uh, uh, and I had no idea what I was gonna work on. And I didn't have anything to say. So I don't know how many of you all have done that, taken on a topic without knowing what it is you want to say about it, and spent a year immersing myself in the discourse. And that's really where Trust Women came from, in recognizing that the problem isn't with legal access to abortion. The problem is in our cultural and religio-cultural orientation to how we think about abortion, pregnancy, women, family, all of the issues that are related to women's reproductive lives and health and autonomy. And as I was deconstructing the justification framework, that became very clear to me the more I looked at it, that we have this framework that shapes our discourse. I knew that we needed another way to think and talk about this. And I learned greatly from my colleagues, mostly women of color, predominantly women of color, who founded the reproductive justice movement and outlined and theorized the framework of reproductive justice, which I think is a framework that shifts us into a conversation that is deeply rooted in the kind of feminist, womanist, anti-racist framework that needs to shape how we think and talk about all of these issues related to family, gender, health, and many of these issues moving forward.
Toddie, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you decided to take this path on, in addition to all the other things that you're doing. Michal, would you like to share how you came to this intersection?
Sure, thanks. I'll say again, thank you to the organizers and to everybody for being here. I wasn't sure I was going to be here today, just when I woke up this morning, but we're here and that's good. So my story is actually similar to Zahra's. I had been in the field of Jewish studies, religious studies, interested in the anthropology of reproduction. And my first book is on the anthropology of lived religion and anthropology and reproduction among ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel, and looking at the way that they make reproductive decisions. And primarily what I was interested in was kind of exploring whether there was a disconnect in how the field had conceived of reproductive ethics, primarily coming from religious texts and religious authorities, and whether that was how real people were making reproductive decisions. I had a hunch that this wasn't the case, but we didn't really know in the scholarship. There was no focused attention on that particular intersection. And so that research really fueled me to just continue going. And I've been interested in questions of the role of religious authority, the role of kind of scripture or not in making reproductive decisions, and finding over and over again that people are making reproductive decisions based on a whole host of factors that often don't overlap with religious authorities or what scholars have often considered to be religious positions on things. And as I moved away from that project, from my first project and back into research in the United States, it became very clear to me that there was also a solidifying around what religious positions on abortion were based on a very narrow definition of what religion is. And as a scholar of religion, this was just unsatisfactory to me. I knew that there was more to religion than a select number of scriptural texts, and yet our discourse is so limited. So this project, when we conceived of it, we really wanted to build out what it means to be a person of faith in America, and a person of faith contending with making reproductive decisions. So that's kind of how I got into the research.
Thank you so much, Michal. And you're bringing me so easily to the next question that I want to ask all of you. You are collaborators on a really exciting project on people of faith and abortion. We would really love to hear about your project. How does your research speak to gaps in dominant conversations about abortion and religion? What types of misconceptions about religion and or abortion does your research actually address? And you've already started kind of taking us in that direction. But I would like to invite you to use this space to really tell us, what would you like people to know or better understand about these topics of abortion and religion? And I am maybe going to invite us to do this opposite. So maybe we'll do Michal and then backwards. So Michal, do you want to jump into that?
Actually, I think I want to let Toddie start.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to
Yeah.
start.
Right.
You can
And
present yourselves in
yeah,
whichever
great.
way feels
Yeah,
best. Go
that's
for
great.
it, Toddie.
Thanks. I'm just going to give a little bit of background on how the project got started and what the outline of the study is. So, I don't even remember what year it was, Michal. We were at an AAR and got talking. We had been on some panels together related to the topic of abortion. And I had done a study, gosh, now 20 years ago, where I had interviewed about 15 women who had second trimester abortions after a poor fetal diagnosis. And it was a really good study, and I learned a lot, and it was a very, very particular subset of people having abortions. And I really was interested, all those years in larger questions around documenting and listening to the stories of people having abortions, particularly religious people. And a lot of that also has to do with the fact that it's religion that's a problem in this debate, and specifically it's Christianity that's a problem in this debate. So again, as a Protestant Christian ethicist, as an ordained Presbyterian minister, part of my own identity as a scholar is also around accountability to the fact that it is Protestant Christians who are creating so much of the problem in this topic. So Michal and I got talking, and we were both interested in this question, and we thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to do a kind of a comparative study where we could look at and see, are there similarities and differences? How are Jewish women experiencing this? How are Christian women experiencing this? And that just grew. We decided it needed to be bigger, and we wanted to have Muslim voices included. And then, because Christianity is the problem, it seemed like we needed more specificity in looking at Christian experiences and voices. And so we decided to bring in Catholic colleague and Monique as particularly focused on Black Protestants, also because Black Protestants or just Black people in the country are really targeted by anti-abortion campaigns in very, very specific ways. And we wanted to have data to really speak to those problems that we were seeing in the cultural landscape. And so we laid out this project in this broad way. I can show you. Can you see that? These are our posters and our postcards. We decided to recruit in clinics. So clinics have big posters that is same thing. And then they pass out these postcards to people. And it basically says, are you Christian, Jewish, or Muslim and having an abortion? We'd like to talk to you. And so people opt in, and we have someone from that tradition. We each interview the people from our own traditions. And we did a pilot project for the first, 6 or 8 months to try to get everything worked out and set up. And then we went national about the month after the Dobbs decision was released. And so that has definitely impacted, we can talk about that impact in a little bit, but that was a major impact on the study. The goal was to have, we divided the country. We used the census 4 regions of the country: Northeast, South, Midwest, West. The original goal was to have 25 interviews for each of the 5 researchers at that point, those 5 different categories of religious people. 25 in each of the 4 regions. So each of the 5 of us would have 100. So it would be a data set of 500. So we could then each write on our own set, but also do comparisons across those sets. Michal, do you want to jump in at this point and add to this?
I could just add, just to say, we really wanted to think of this project both as a collaborative and something that would be beneficial individually. So as we were designing, we thought a lot, and this just, from the little things like, what questions do we each really want to be able to answer at the end? And therefore, what questions are we going to ask of our participants? And so the interview questions were designed in collaboration and in reflection after the pilot study. And then also just the idea that in each geographic location, we would each have 25 participants, that would hopefully enable us to be able to say something in a qualitative study about the 25 participants in the Northeast. As that's a good qualitative study, a number for a qualitative study. And then we would also have the comparative factor. So that's how we were thinking of it, that we would be able to walk away from this very heavily time invested project with stuff that we could benefit from individually, but that would be relevant to us as individual scholars and also in a collective, because the humanities don't really have a good setup framework guide for doing this kind of collaborative work. So we had to, consult with and some of the more quantitative folks that I consulted with or who have done this kind of research are actually on this call right now. So I just want to appreciate that. We didn't have a guide for how to do this. And so we learned from how other people are doing it and tried to adapt to this kind of study. Yeah.
Zahra, do you want to jump in?
No, on the matter of the background of the study, I think that one of the strengths, of our project is precisely our collaborative model and how we've come together. Because we're not doing the close your eyes, hold hands in the walk across the field of interfaith dialogue. This is a collaboration of scholars who realize the importance of religion as a pole, as a heavyweight in the discourse about abortion, and how it is that, and our collaboration actually enables us to ask similar, not identical, but similar questions, but take responses that are nuanced depending on the traditions that we study and the people that we work with and study, and in order to offer that nuanced perspective and nuanced analysis, hopefully in the end game, of how religion matters in how figures in the abortion discussion and abortion debate and all of that. So it's and our collaboration has really been a a great model of how feminist scholars can come together to do this kind of work as well, and get things done. I have really appreciated that aspect of the study and of the collaboration that has really been meaningful and fulfilling for me professionally and personally as well.
So we wanted to shift to your question about how does your research speak to gaps in the dominant conversation about abortion and religion. I'll talk a little bit about a piece of that. One of the gaps that I noticed when I was doing my research for Trust Women was, I read a lot of social scientific literature about abortion, about women's reasons for abortion, about stigma. And so much of that literature, which is done by social scientists, really posits religion as a problem. And so certainly the stigma research, we're finding lots of ways in which religion is stigma. So, I think it's not that that piece around stigma is necessarily wrong. We just felt it was very incomplete because it wasn't being done by people who had a deep understanding of the study of religion, the role of religion, how to think about what these participants were saying about religion in their lives. So we feel like the study can function in some ways as a corrective, as a way to expand and deepen how these social scientists are thinking about stigma. And I think it's really important that we also help social scientists, but also sort of medical professionals as well, think about religion not only as a problem, but one of the things that is one of the dominant findings, in the Protestant category that I'm working mostly with, is also the role that religion plays as a support mechanism, the relationship that people share, or the way that people talk about their relationship with God, about forgiveness. So again, at least in our Protestant group, one of the things we found was a lot of, uh, you know, interest in our first paper that we're working on really relates to how do Protestant women in the South think about the morality of abortion. And so we categorized people in, only 20%, kind of surprisingly, said that it was a sin. 45% said it wasn't a sin. And then about a third said sort of were more ambivalent or more conflicted. But even that group that talked about it as a sin very quickly talked about, and God forgives sins, right? And that's just a very deep part of that tradition that's going to be missed by many of those social scientists because they're not asking the follow-up questions, or they're not asking specifically about how women are thinking about their abortion decision as part of their reproductive journey and as part of their life as a Christian woman or Christian person. And that actually relates. Michal, do you want to talk more? Do you want to pick up on the lived religion piece?
Yeah, well, one of the things that, I mean, we know that there are a lot of polls about abortion attitudes, right? I mean, Pew does polls, the Public Religion Research Institute does polls. And so we have kind of percentages of support or opposition to the legality of abortion among different religious groups. But one of the things that Toddie's work has pointed out in the past is, that when we think about abortion as an abstract, it doesn't give us the right understanding of abortion. When people are making decisions about abortion, they're making their decision based on their real life circumstances. And that was really important for us to get at, right? Sort of how are people living through these circumstances? And I know some of the wonderfully illuminating conversations that we've had as a group, Monique has often talked about this, that, and you can add to it, Monique, obviously, is that, people are making these decisions based on like lots of different cultural factors, that whether their religious leader is saying something directly from the pulpit may be a factor, but really may not be. And so trying to understand where those religious ideas about reproduction are coming from has really been a central piece of this study.
Yeah, and that relates to your next question that you asked us about what misconceptions about religion or abortion does our research address. And Monique was going to highlight or expand on some of those things Michal was laying out.
Yeah, thanks. So before getting there, I want to loop back to the question on sort of what gaps did you see and what gaps did you think the research was filling in. And for me, everything was a gap because, again, I wasn't that interested in abortion. And so I, as a sexual ethicist, started to think through where are the conversations with Black women and where are the conversations about Black moral agency and Black female moral agency, where are they happening? And so tying that to the reproductive decision-making of abortion is sort of the entry point of where I thought my work was going. And that led me to the rabbit hole that Michal was just pointing to is, okay, if the literature isn't saying we're tracking anything, and the people that I'm interviewing aren't saying they're hearing this from their pulpits, then where are these messages coming from? Largely from culture and not from their religious spaces. Relatively few of my interviewees had heard an anti-abortion sermon, yet most presumed that they had to be forgiven for the sin of abortion. And when pressed in the interview, like, well, what was the sin if no one told you it was a sin in your religious space? They prayed for forgiveness, that God would understand the decision that they had to make. They prayed for decisions about whether they'd have to disclose, like whether they would be judged. But very few really had been theologically introduced to the idea. And when pressed, even the idea of what is this sin you are asking forgiveness from, the sin sometimes varied from, well, it says in the Bible that this is murder. And when pressed, like, where? No one knew. When pressed to, well, where are you getting the message that abortion is murder and thus it's a sin? No one could point me back to, like, my pastor said, my mother said, but they were pointing to this larger conversation that was going on. And so I've been trying to trace that larger conversation. And I've written, some of my prior work is on Black religious media, and I've written about conservative religious media. There's a conservative site, blackgenocide.org, and they had ramped up during the time of the initial passing of abortion bans across the South. And they ramped up billboards, especially, and social media campaigns around reinvigorating what they call the anemic pro-life, Black pro-life movement. And one of the things they were trying to do is link abortion as murder as a part of white genocide for Black people. And none of that was deeply theological, though. It was funded, though, 100% by evangelical white Christian organizations. And the persons that they chose, Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter was one of the people that was on the paid staff to have these conversations, to show up in Black spaces and read white evangelical Christian language to Black people. So when I started hearing conversations around where is this dialogue happening, it wasn't happening from Black people for Black people. It was happening with Black people saying what white people had given them a blueprint for. And I think for so many of us, that has been what's particularly challenging, because if the intervention is, oh, we've just got to train pastors better, do some interventions in seminaries and theological schools, then, that feels like, oh, we're fixing a problem. But honestly, that's not the problem that I think the participating in this study really showed me. It's dangerous when you follow the money and you find where the money takes you, because it leads to, like, the entrenchment in the empire and in the entrenchment in white supremacist ideologies. And that is a much bigger elephant to try to bring down. And so for me, that has been, I think, one of the challenges, but also one of the aha moments, is really thinking that through, but also thinking that through collectively with the group. And then finally, the final thing I'll say is that my interest in the study was, as Toddie pointed out, quantitative studies point out that Black women are disproportionately represented in the overall number of abortions received, roughly 28% of abortions, despite only being 13% of the American population. And yet I was trying to track, was this disproportionate number genocidal? Or can we refer to it and reference it as Black women using moral agency in specific ways? And so doing these interviews helped me hear from women who'd had experiences like my own, and my own termination, where I chose my own life. And there needed to be space and value added and value given to Black women say, our lives matter. And this decision was in reference to me choosing my life and my survival, or my life and the life of the children that I currently have. So I'll stop there.
And Zahra, the last question, what would you like people to know or better understand? You were gonna respond to that. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. I was going to start off by saying some of the things that you've already said, but mean, just to say that there are a lot of stakeholders in the discourse about abortion, right? I mean, in medicine, in politics, law, you know, people always have a say and want to have a say, I should say. Um, and oftentimes they don't have the facility to talk about religion's influence on the discourse. And you know, especially many of us have had interactions with medical providers, and you know, I mean, I know I have started to give talks at med schools and so on and so on and so forth, for my research on Islamic medical ethics, but also more recently on abortion. And you know, and much of the discussion about abortion within medicine just does not have any facility to talk about religion at all. And it does end up being this pink elephant in the room because everyone knows that there's an influence, but nobody wants to talk about it and no one knows how to talk about it. Um, and it's really exacerbated by the fact that often secular, popular, or popular white feminism has had a long history of blaming religious discourses for the oppression of women and eschew religion and you know, as the source of women's oppression. And so that's created this space for the evangelical right and evangelical white supremacist right to co-opt the discourse in ways that Monique was talking about as well, and Toddie was talking about as well. In And that actually is, never mind that disregards that there have been faithful feminists and established fields of feminist theologies and so on and so forth, which, you know, they are sidelined and often not part of the discussion about abortion at all. And so when we study religious people or people who identify as being faithful getting abortions, their narratives tell us a lot about exactly um, how faith figures into the idea of abortion and termination and all of the questions about philosophical questions, deeply philosophical questions about life and death and our purpose and all of these other questions. So that's what we get from it. And some of the um and then some of the things that I would like people to understand better, from particularly from my side, someone who studies Islam and Muslim women's experiences, is to say that there is a great misconception um, about Muslim women in particular, but as well as other women of faith, as being uh, oppressed by their religion and therefore not having any agency, any place to seek redress, any place to have their own voice and any opportunity to pursue something like abortion if and when it becomes necessary. And so you know, within the Islamic tradition, there is a very long history of talking about abortion that dates back to the pre-modern, you know, medieval period, in which jurists and medical practitioners and midwives often saw the need for terminating, and most scholars do agree that termination is permissible within a religious framework, within the Islamic legal framework, up until the halfway point of pregnancy. And people don't realize this as being a part of the religious tradition, and not only is it permissible, but often sometimes it is necessary to pursue as a matter of preserving life, preserving the life of the pregnant person. And so, you know, and so when Monique was speaking about, you know, choosing oneself and the life and one's own life as part of the process, as part of the discourse of a religious approach to abortion, that is the case for Muslims as well. And so, and many of whom are most of whom are people of color, and most of whom, and half of whom, at least in the United States, are Black Muslims. And so there is a, very sort of understanding and compassionate based discourse within the Islamic tradition surrounding reproductive health and in abortion in particular, which now, and we were talking about the cultural, very, very heavy weight, the big elephant of culture that is affecting even religious discourses outside of Christianity. It is the case for Muslims as well that you will see now uh, random imams and random folks who just aren't familiar with this long history of a long tradition of supporting abortion and supporting women in reproductive health, um, uh, who aren't familiar with it, who are now saying things that resemble the very same arguments that the evangelical right, white supremacist evangelical right put forward, such as, oh, it's loose, it's immoral, it's abortion is, we can't support abortion willy-nilly, and you can't use abortion in place of as a casual form of contraception, and so on and so forth. And these kinds of arguments are now creeping into Muslim discourses within the United States surrounding abortion, and people are unsure as to what the tradition says. And then so part of my job is not only to record and the narratives of faithful Muslim women who are getting abortions and why they are, but also to has now become this role of also reassuring that there is a rich scholarly tradition that is supportive of women's reproductive health and women's health in general, both mental as well as physical, in the process of pregnancy and possibly termination as well. So I'm having to provide scholarly that scholarly background, as well as record the narratives, and then also make turn around and talk about how all of this actually can inform our broader discourse on faith and faith-based approaches, as well as the understanding of religion and religious discourses within the broader abortion debate. So there is a lot there, and multiple layers of how we've had to make interventions. But one of which is reiterating this strong tradition of supporting women's health, in the tradition that we sort of that Muslims often are not known for because of the overwhelming stereotypes, white supremacist stereotypes, of Islam oppressing women.
Wow, thank you all so much. It's really beautiful to see you speak about your work collaboratively. It really gives us a sense of this kind of collaborative feminist resistance that you all really embody. So thank you for that, and for thinking about not only the gaps, but really the elephants that a few of you used as a term that are really in the room. I want to ask one final question before we move on and open this up to our other people in the room with us. And you can answer this individually or as a group, whatever feels the best for you. So what do you see as the main challenges, but also opportunities for realizing the goals your work sets out to achieve? You spoke a lot about thinking beyond religion as a problem, but we'd really love to hear some concrete examples from your own experiences. And again, individually, collaboratively, whoever wants to go first.
I think we wanted to talk about the challenges first, and then move to the opportunities. So we have a couple of challenges we wanted to highlight. Just very practically, in doing the study, we had enormous trouble. We still are having trouble getting funding. We got funding for the pilot project, and have not had any significant funding. We had some small funding. once we moved into the main phase of the project. And that's just a huge challenge because we have now completed 100 and wanted to make sure I get the 196 interviews. And we don't have the time to write up our findings because we've not been able to get the funding to really give us the release time we need to really get this data out there. And so that has been a huge struggle. We're running out of the funding we had for the gift cards and for the interview transcriptions. I mean, just the most basic, funding that we need. And so that's just been an ongoing challenge. And then, we had a big challenge that we moved to the second phase of this right as Dobbs came down, and our model was to recruit through clinics, and we could talk more about why that is if you're interested, but that was a fundamental aspect of the model. And when we went national, we well, I don't have to go on all the details, but we got the Midwest responded. So we now have good data from the Midwest and from the South, but we had incredible difficulty getting clinics in the Northeast and clinics in the West to partner with us for collection. We underestimated the low response rate that we would have. So it took longer to get numbers than we anticipated. And we also had transition with interviewers, and so gaps that were challenging. We don't really know the mechanics of how, but there were at least 2 major incidents where our information about how to access our data, we think, was spread through anti-choice networks. And so we had floods of people who were not in our clinics, which was actually we were really glad we had specific clinics because it was very easy to see who wasn't coming from the clinics that we were partnering with. So that actually helped us really weed out people who were trying to get into the study. We don't know why, but they were trying to get into the study. Yeah, so those are some of the basic pieces. Mikhail, did you want to?
I just want to add, we
Yep,
also
yep.
we have a particularly low response rate among Jews and Muslims.
Yes.
That has really kind of hampered the ability of the study to be the kind of interreligious or cross-religious research gathering that we had wanted it to. So, I mean, I know Zahra is doing other research on Muslim women and medical decisions. I launched a separate study on Jews who've had abortions that had different criteria in order to gather some data. And we're trying to think as a group about how we can compare. Are we now comparing apples and oranges, or are these kind of the same? And what can we learn from these different studies? It's not unheard of to say this group of from this data we got this, and from this data we got that, and put it together. But trying to figure out how to move forward there. And then kind of a coding, and this is an interesting kind of academic research coding challenge, which is that what sounds like stigma from one religious participant doesn't necessarily sound like stigma to another religious participant, or trying to figure out how to create codes that we're all happy with is a challenge. It is different when, if any, so most of us have done our own qualitative research. We've come up with our own codes that were worked for us, that we understood, and now trying to create, codes that work for 4 or 5 skilled, experienced researchers is a challenge. This is just something that we didn't have a model for, and is a real challenge. So those types of things are hard in the research. Monique, you wanted to add something also, I think.
Yeah, so when we started the initial phase, we were in North Carolina, where there was still abortion possible. And phase 1 was what it was. We were learning and we were gaining information, and the interviews were expected, but with some surprises. Post Dobbs, we started doing interviews in places where there just really was no access. There was absolutely no access to abortion in Texas, for example. and persons were having to travel and go places far, far away by themselves, get on a plane. You know, they were using funds and being helped, but we had questions in the data about, like, how do we track this? And how do we not put people in jeopardy when we note that they were here, but they've moved there? We also had just the quality of the interview changed, at least for me, of these interviews. It became heartbreaking hearing stories of people waking up in strange states, not knowing where they were, how their children were doing, having questions about, is this too much bleeding? And if I say it is, will I have to stay another day? And what happens to my job? And I broke, I think, as a researcher. And that was an unexpected challenge that was not present for the first phase, that became a challenge in the second phase. And I'm still not sure what to do with that. But it was largely a part of my decision not to continue forward as we moved through the Northeast. I just don't have the bandwidth emotionally to do that emotional labor. And that's something I think we collectively have had to think about as well. I think Toddie's the last woman standing of our group. And that is a part of that dialogue too, a conversation to have about when collaborative projects transition and what that means. So I bring those up as challenges that we noted.
I mean, also, you know, we're all in different states. And so, you know, there was a concern, and there still is, what researchers looking into abortion, what kind of, you know, consequences there might be for us professionally, even those of us who are tenured. And for our participants, I mean, privacy, anonymity became a much larger concern after Dobbs. It already was but, you know, trying to think about how to store our data in a way that secures the privacy of our participants, and not just the privacy, their safety, physically, legally. I mean, those are real challenges and concerns. And, you know, abortion researchers are familiar with this, and we learned a lot from them, and we implemented a lot of their procedures, and everybody's learning here in a legal environment that is being created. And so actively created currently. So that's a real challenge for abortion, for people collecting data about from people who've had abortions. That is a real challenge that we need to be contending with.
Yeah, I would add that, and I'd be curious, I haven't asked you all this lately, but I get a lot of hate mail. I get a lot of very directed attacks on the internet. You know, and part of that's about this study, but part of that is just being a researcher and an outspoken advocate as a Christian scholar and an ordained minister, saying that abortion is morally good, right? That was the piece. It wasn't just, I didn't get attacked as much when I was just talking about legal access, but when the argument is actually a Christian counter narrative that abortion is a morally good option and decision for people, that has just made people, it's just exploded people's minds. And I have become a target. And, you know, it's been over 10 years. So, I mean, I'm sort of used to it, but it's always there. And it is something that you know, certainly there are other scholars of religion who have similar or parallel kinds of experiences where groups target them, but it's not something that's normal in scholarship. And it's not something like, if I have felt unsafe, there's no one for me to reach out to or call. So I always just scan the emails and the letters just to make sure there's not a specific threat. I guess I would call the police if I felt there was, but that's something that we're just not prepared for as researchers. So there's that piece. But let's shift to opportunities. I think we all feel like there's a lot of opportunities, that the study is really important. I mentioned we had 196 total interviews. 151 of those are Protestants, 30 are Catholic, 10 are Muslim, and 5 are Jews. So we do have a very serious gap in reaching the levels that we were hoping to find. But we do have 196 interviews, and there's just so much data that we have collected. There's so much, there's so many different venues to publish in, so many different dialogue partners, so much richness in the data, that I think we're all excited about. What can we do and how can we get this information out there? So that's one piece, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues to talk about other opportunities.
Sorry, you haven't spoken in a while. I don't know if you want to anything.
No, I think that those are the challenges. I just going back to the fact that there aren't enough Muslim and Jewish participants. I mean, there's oftentimes, it's because we're going to physical clinics to do the recruitment. There so much of the it depends on where and whether there are lots of Muslims and Jews in the area to begin with. But we've had to, as a group, make decisions about whether or not we would expand our recruitment to online so that we could get the demographic numbers that we were hoping to get. And that comes with its own unique set of challenges. Partially, the reservation is frankly to protect ourselves from being targets of lots and lots of spam and hate mail and whatever else that that we would get. And it's odd that something that is cyber is more threatening than something that is like recruitment in person. But that's the world we live in. And so the when we did receive those that influx of numbers of people trying to get into the study that were suspicious, it caused all of it. We had like emergency texts flying to each other because it is indeed something that is a barrier to this work, to sort of be able to weed out the genuine from the fake, because there are, again, so many people who have emotional reactions to the topic.
So one of the I'll share also in terms of opportunities. So when one of the opportunities that developed because of the low enrollments of Jews is that I opened a separate study to try. I had a hunch about why we weren't getting Jews, but I wasn't positive, because we did talk about areas, of the country that would be, that had good populations of all of these different religious traditions, and yet we still weren't getting a good representation of all. And so I launched a separate study of Jews who've had abortions since 1973. And there it really did become clear that the Jews that participated in my separate study actually were not going to clinics, which is why we weren't recruiting them from our other study. They weren't going to clinics. They had primary care physicians who were providing abortions for them, or gynecologists. And so we weren't catching them in the same way. But being able to launch that study was an opportunity. And there was a question in the chat already about what comes next in Project 2025 and whether this type of thing is going to be feasible. And I'll just say that I think, so the separate study that I launched had such an outpouring of a response. I mean, we were able to recruit 150 survey responses within 3 months, and we did 75 interviews in 3 months. And these are all from people who just needed to talk about their abortions in the current political context. People understand that this is extremely important, and that all the shame and stigma they might be feeling privately despite all the shame and stigma they're feeling privately, they need to talk about their abortions. And I think this has brought a lot of people out of their own kind of hiding places, their own concerns about how they're perceived, and that's really great. And the other thing I'll name about opportunities is that we had the opportunity to share our research as part of an amicus brief for one of the religious freedom cases. So the Columbia Center on Law, Rights, and Religion, which maybe I'm getting wrong. I always get that acronym wrong. It's lots of R's and law. But they, I think somebody from there is on the call right now. We've had wonderful relationship with them, and they helped put together an amicus brief for a religious freedom case in Indiana that is opposing the state ban, that has right now made it to the state Supreme Court. This is, thank you, Elizabeth Blatt, the Law, Rights, and Religion Project. But our data is there saying, and the lawyers say explicitly, right, folks of faith have abortions. That is all, and they do it out of their religious motivations, and that is an expression of their religious freedom. And that, therefore the ban is a violation of their religious freedom. And that is remarkable. And I think as we think towards, what comes next for the country and how this research can make an intervention in what's going to be another very tough slog ahead, I hope that we have more opportunities for things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add a final opportunity that I discovered, and I'm glad to see that there's a physician on the call. Part of my interest in the questions as we were co-creating them was the experience of women of color in these clinics and what healthcare outcomes are they getting, because I know quite intimately about the Black maternal health crisis and the lack of full comprehensive services. And so I had hoped that we could be a feedback loop from our study back to the clinics, sharing what was working and what wasn't working for the women that I was interviewing particularly, and for all the other women in the study, because it was a question that we all had as a part of our set of questions. And I think that as an opportunity is to keep doing interventions on the ground with direct service providers. I think we have that opportunity for those who've been, talking to medical students who've been doing ground rounds and those kinds of things. I think that is an opportunity as well that we shouldn't minimize, because that for me is the boots on the ground, day-to-day thing that we can say we touched.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Before I pass on to Mickey for the Q&A, I just want to say thank you for the emotional labor and for doing what you're doing despite all of the hardships that you have gone through during this project, and for really outlining the opportunities that this entails. We can already see questions coming up. Mickey, you can take us to the Q&A.
Sure. Thank you all very much. This is just a really important study, and I'm so glad that you're all collecting these stories. And I just think it's really incredible, and I'm really appreciative of the work you all are doing in this moment and before and beyond. So thank you so much. We have a question in the chat that I'm actually interested in as well. So when recruiting, when you were thinking about, clinics, and I know that you had some trouble sort of with figuring out where you wanted to recruit from and how that might work. Were religious organizations, different groups or places of worship, are those sorts of places that you thought about as places to find participants, or sort of focusing on the clinic? We have a question as well about, partnering with maybe the clinic being hard just because of telemedicine, things like that. So thinking about those spaces and places now with the shifting landscapes, before, Dobbs, after Dobbs, we know that it changed a lot, but it also didn't necessarily change all of the access of reproductive health care. So I'm curious what you all think about different spaces of thinking about your questions and people you'd reach out to.
Yeah, this was a question we talked a lot about when we were designing the study. And some of what influenced the decision, at least on my part, was my experience of the previous study that I did 20 years ago. And I recruited primarily snowball sampling, but also through a website for women who were seeking out support after second trimester terminations for fetal diagnoses. And I felt very clearly that it was a a biased sample, in the sense that people who were having extreme difficulty with that experience were reaching out to this support network. And so we were trying to figure out how to get a data set that was more just open to the group of people who were having abortions, not necessarily influenced by a particular website or group. We were also, I particularly had real concerns about how to have that sort of access that it, to the extent possible, prevented anti-choice groups infiltrating and trying to skew the data set. So we landed on the clinic partnerships. If we had, larger groups of clinics, I think we would have better responses and yeah, I like the suggestion. We have talked about how do we think about partnering with some people who are doing telemedicine, sending out medication, abortion drugs. We don't have inroads with how to do that. I think we would be open to doing that in trying to figure out what that might look like. But those are some of the reasons that we chose to work with clinics. If others of you want to jump in there as well.
And part of it is retaining the anonymity, the keeping the participants' identities concealed, right? Because the online footprint is a serious one that we can't control. We don't have the technical abilities to control where we could save off-site or on paper the contacts of our participants, but beyond that, if we move to online recruitment, it very much introduces variables that we can't control in terms of protecting the identities of the participants. And then, but honestly, I mean, it also depends on whether or not we are able to. I mean, one of the reasons why we chose to partner with clinics, or at least an in-person facility, right, as opposed to something online, or is because we wanted to get fresh perspectives, and we were not sure as to how far out would we how far out since the since termination would we admit to our study, and we landed on like within a year of having the termination as being sort of our limit as to when we would be able to include them in our study, and because of the perspectives gained and the kind of discussion that we could have with the participants, and so the clinics seemed to be the right way to go. But moving forward, we could probably revisit that depending on what directions we want to go in, but and whether or not our research questions might have slightly shifted or whatever. But one of the other questions that I was looking at is whether or not we included Catholicism, and we do have researchers that are just not with us on this program, this event, that do research with people who identify as Catholic and have gotten abortions. So.
Great. Thank you all very much for those responses to some of our questions in the chat. I would like to kind of end these last sort of 10 minutes that we have together. It sounds like, you being a part of this project, it's come with surprises and transformations for each of you, personally and professionally. And I think what stuck out to me in the beginning, you said our current discourses around religion and reproductive health and abortion are pretty limited, right, and unnuanced in a lot of ways. So I know this is a broad question, but maybe we can kind of end on this broader question. So what might you like to see transformed in these larger conversations that you talked about? So for instance, the sort of racist religious ideology and cultural discourses that some of you talked about, and that you noted in your remarks, or sort of that sociocultural issue around abortion that you talked about. So what would you like to see transformed in these larger conversations, beyond sort of the details of your study?
So I'm going to start first because this has been my soapbox. I think too many scholars and too many questions are centered around abortion. And I want to shift the discourse to reproductive justice. And that can't be done with just taking on the term, because it is a new catchy term that gets funding. It has to be done in allyship, in conversation with communities of color and women of color that are doing the reproductive justice work, that says this can't just be about this one thing. Because if the election has shown us anything, it is there are lots of things that are primary for folks. And this sole focus on this sole issue or this sole concentration, I think, is myopic, because it misses all of the death dealing ways that women and pregnant persons are having their lives threatened. And so I want to loop that back to the agency question, the bodily autonomy question, that was there at the end. For me, that's the opportunity, is to start thinking with and in collaboration with others who are advancing the moral agency and the reproductive agency across the board. And so for some, that might be helping fund terminations or gaining access for terminations. For others, it might be lobbying against the insulting and blocking possibilities of educational systems, or school to prison pipelines, or food deserts, or kids who can't get lunch. Like it has to be more expansive than this one thing. And if that is all we are organizing for, I think I'm going to join the legions of other Black women who tap out and say, you white women, you go fix that for yourselves, because that's a project that I'm not deeply invested in, nor do I think it will be a benefit to other women of color.
I think likewise, I feel like I would agree with everything Monique just said. I think that there's only so much I can do by saying that yes, there is a very, broad and rich understanding of reproductive health and reproductive justice, and from an Islamic perspective, and that Muslims actually do support abortion and so forth. Because if the overarching broad discussion within the United States of the political landscape is one that excludes us as Americans, then we just can't actually have a conversation. My contribution is not particularly neither here nor there, and so the broader conversation, in which there is nuance to religious positions surrounding abortion, is necessary, to acknowledge that religious perspectives vary, and that the evangelical right does not have a monopoly over the final answer on religion and abortion, is both a political and a cultural front, and that our research does address. But I think engaging with religious traditions, and recognizing the multiple ways that religion is at play in our politics, and the very sort of narrow way that religion is at play in our politics, is something that we can sort of do across the board, both even outside of our study. So yeah.
So I would add that, or I would say that I come to this topic of abortion from my commitments as a liberation theologian, liberation feminist theologian, and work that I have done with poverty and globalization and economic marginalization. And I see the stories and the narratives that we have collected as a fulcrum for um, opening up a lot of the problems that that abortion opens the door to, or potentially opens the door to. So there are all of these stereotypes and misconceptions about who has abortions and why they have abortions, and so part of it is blowing that up. But in blowing that up, what I hope is to do exactly what Monique is talking about, which is shift the discourse away from a narrow focus on abortion to actually talk about um, um, many of the problems that are embedded in the stories that we're hearing. So the lack of access to contraception or contraception options that are working for people, the lack of medically accurate sex education in our country, the lack of attention to the health of um, uh, pregnant people, or the healthcare needs of pregnant people, the extreme poverty that people are struggling with as they tell their stories. I feel like it open that the stories and people's experiences open doors for helping people who are only interested in abortion see that the issues are much broader than abortion. And I would be interested in how we think about um, capturing that audience that is very focused on abortion and helping them understand the ways in which these issues that women are struggling with are about more than abortion access. And so they are about bodily autonomy, they are about poverty, they are about healthcare and access and support. Um, and also my interest is in how do we help transform the theologies that support how we think and talk about all of those issues that these women are struggling with. Because one of the things that has been so deeply striking to me is the solitariness and aloneness of people's experiences of their abortions, um, and that is directly related to um, harmful theologies that are coming from Christian people. So I am interested in transforming not just theologies about abortion, but theologies about how we think about women and bodily autonomy and family and decision making and gender, and a much wider set of theologies that intersect and undergird this sort of white Christian nationalism that is attempting to narrow our understanding of gender and gender roles and family and social order in general. So I feel like the transformation that needs to happen is a broad theological kind of transformation. Um, and I learn from the interviews that I do. I learn new language and new ways that people are thinking about these issues, and it's inspiring, and it's um encouraging to try to think about how to shape new theologies that might help support people, give people hope, and be transformative. Michal?
Well, I know we're out of time. I just wanted to, I mean, I agree with everything my colleagues said. I think the key thing is the idea was to learn from people of faith who are having abortions. And what we've learned is that abortion is just one tiny decision in the context of a much larger life that has to do with all of the issues that have been named: education and the economy and healthcare and racial justice, and that's what we're learning from them. And I think we need to, implement that kind of thinking on a broader scale.
Thank you, Michal. Thank you really to each of our speakers and to our participants. I had no idea how this was going to go today. Listening to all of you, listen to all of these women has been a ray of light to me. I see your work really as a gift to all of us. And it sounds like it's been a really long and hard journey. I really see it as a gift, and I thank you for that gift. Your work is so important and transformative, and I hope that we've done our little part in helping you get your voices out there. So this is the end of our fall programming for the Reproduction and Religion Public Pedagogies Project. We're really excited to continue this series. Please stay tuned for more information. These conversations are so important. We will continue to be having them. And thank you all for coming and for being here with us today.